Alright, response video to this stupid Luddy, the Duddy, from Dumb Fucky, whatever. I just love he's just such a typical pseudo intellectual. He has a little vocabulary, a little eloquence with words. You know, he plays his little actor on YouTube. And that's all it is. It's just the pretense of intelligence. Just the cosmetics, just the facade, but no substance. It's just all paper thin, and it's all so arrogant and pompous. Antinatalism refuted. I'll bet you $1 gazillion he's not going to refute anything. He's going to build a straw man, and he's going to huff and puff and spit on himself. But anyway, so I'll demonstrate him to be the asshole that he is. So leave us begin. Might take a while.
Well, I've been away for some time, and I suppose it's good to be back. It seems as if I've recently missed a rather large wave of videos on antinatalism. I've kind of missed out on the discussion, so better late than never.
Blah, blah, blah.
Seems as if it's going to extend into the future for a good while.
Yep, blah, blah, blah. So I guess even you realize that your refutation is going to be lame and silly and stupid and pointless, and it's really not going to advance the conversation one little tiny bit. Yeah, you're not going to smite them with your sword of knowledge.
I find it interesting that there are moral nihilists, antinatalists. I suppose this is perplexing because...
Yeah, well, whatever. So right there is false premise, just to start with. So, yeah, way to go. You know, he's basically saying there's some sort of antinatalist who don't care. And, yeah, that's only like Tranquil and the heroin, you know, the assholes. The antinatalists don't want calling themselves antinatalists. So you're going to argue with them? Idiot.
Of the generally explicit use of moral language that the position of antinatalism is responsible for as regards its believers.
It's a value equation, idiot. It's not moral language. It might be called ethics, but it's fundamentally just a value equation. So you want to again, it's just you're playing a game with words. You want to make it sound like it's some sort of dogmatic morality when it's just a simple argument.
Never mind the reification here, you get the point. It is wrong to have children, but there is no wrong. You ought not bring an entity into the world that, as a matter of contingent fact, will suffer, but ought is a fairy tale word.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, it's just so stupid. It's not a fairy tale word when it's happening to you, asshole. If I was going to be doing some stuff, you know, like shoving flagpole up your ass, it's going to be pretty easy for you to come up with the language. You ought to not do that. I mean, this whole argument that there's nothing in the universe that has any meaning or by explicit definition can be stated to have a value substance is just idiotic. Okay? Suffering in and of itself, separated from context, as a thing, okay, unpleasant sensation is negative. It's always better to be without it. It's a bad fucking thing, unless it's doing some other thing in the world that is in some way going to prevent even more suffering. That's the irony here, you shitheads. You'll defend your suffering by saying, well, it'll cause me less suffering in the future if I suffer now. Ugh, idiot.
Perhaps the anti-realist or antinatalist will be inclined to, as so many YouTubers are annoyingly want to do, collapse the discussion into preferences. Such being the case, and
yeah, so who are you arguing with again? Again, this isn't antinatalism refuted. You're talking about some fringe antinatalists who are nihilists? Well, again, this is just a loose, stupid, idiotic argument, and you're disguising it as something else, which is the cliche definition of a pseudo-intellectual.
In a non-bridgeable fissure of values between the antinatalist and the breeder, there's nothing to discuss. Let the antinatalist register his disgust with the reader, and that's that.
Oh, yeah, whatever. Like we just register our disgust with anybody else who violates somebody else's will without consent, okay? Or anybody else who risks somebody else's welfare. So, let the dioxin producer do as he will and dump his chemical where he will and do whatever the fuck he wants, and we'll just register the protest of the people who got the cancer. I mean, it's just fucking stupid, idiot. I mean, what the fuck? Frogs should be insulted by this insult to intelligence.
In the absence of reason, as qua moral nihilism, you cannot intersubjectively reason as regards the evaluative realm, because there are no normative facts to discuss. Qua the position, moral language is not truth apt in the first place, or there are no objective moral properties supervening or otherwise.
So again, this is his straw man. There's no objective moral precepts, whatever, blah, 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 blah. So again, this idiotic notion that somehow through our intelligence and our acquisition of knowledge through our own experience of consciousness, like we are conscious, we experience it, we know parts of it really, really suck and parts of it really, really kick ass. And that's just a fact. That's a fact we glean by actually being conscious. And he's just basically saying, oh no, consciousness doesn't mean anything. Whether you feel good or bad doesn't mean anything. If we have a Holocaust tomorrow and 3 billion people die slowly and horribly, it doesn't matter if they just played hopscotch instead. It would be morally equivalent, ethically equivalent. I mean, these kind of people, these people who don't think there's value in the world, who don't think suffering sucks, we should find them, round them up, and we should replace all the laboratory animals that are being experimented on with them. And we should just do our experiments on these motherfuckers who think harm can't be accomplished, that there's no such thing as a harm. Fucking idiots.
There is no moral reality to disagree over. The collapse of the evaluative realm into preferences to collapse it into the will to power.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, could you just make one or two sentences that actually say something except cliche references to nonsensical jargon that might be 100 or 200 or 500 years old? I mean, just actually say something literally and out front. I mean, fuck you. It isn't. You're not strangling vocabulary or conceptual understandings to say something like, "Oh yeah, well, this sentience thing sort of creates value in the universe. There's now something's welfare. Something actually has a welfare now. Okay, unlike this razor blade that doesn't really have a welfare. It just doesn't have an interest. Okay, yeah, there's nothing there. It's just a razor blade. A sentient creature has a welfare, and that welfare we can discern from all available facts and figures is distinctly different than a non-sentience, non-welfare.
The moral irrealist, anti-natalist, undermines anti-natalism via his irrealism. And personally, I have no interest in conversing with him.
Oh, fine. Yeah, I have no interest in sharing oxygen with assholes like you. I literally believe you should be annihilated for being insane. You are fucking insane. Okay? You can't figure out that we have beyond reasonable doubt evidence that the welfare of sentient creatures is something worthy of consideration, that there is a value there. Maybe we can argue about what the value is relative to relative, but there's just no doubt that if something can go ouch, it has a value, fucker.
And this brings us to a problem that I frequently see among anti-natalists. Moral realism is often simply presupposed and rarely defended. Providing such a defense is no easy task. It's thoroughly philosophically involved. There's the challenge.
Oh, whatever. Yeah, right. Oh, yeah, there's a challenge of recognizing that suffering sucks. Ooh, too complicated.
There's of semantics, that is non-cognitivism. There's the ontological challenge, stemming mostly from reductive physicalism, and the epistemic challenge, which is multifaceted. We have no empirical access to moral properties.
We have no empirical access to moral properties. So he's saying that sentience does not create a property, okay, like welfare, like a positive and a negative disposition, a capacity to be in a negative state of conscious experience or a positive state of conscious experience. We don't have access to that knowledge. We can't ascertain the properties of the sentient organism and label them positive and negative. That is somehow cognitively ludicrous. Yeah, right, right. You agree with me, right? This guy should just be run over by a steamroller.
Moral claims are not logically necessary. That is, there is no contradiction in their denial. Moral realism is also frequently called into question because it seems explanatorily superfluous. And just as causal...
Well, I guess it can't be explanatorily superfluous if you assholes can't even acknowledge the existence of a goddamn feeling.
Full theories of knowledge exclude the existence of abstract objects. Said theories also exclude moral properties. That is, as it is argued, they are causally inert.
Causally inert. So just remember that. You know, when you got one of those pains from the cancer or some other kind of thing, and just say it's causally inert. Yeah, it's causally inert. No. Oh, God. Oh. You should be rendered inert.
For the record, I do believe these challenges can be met. I myself am a moral realist. Non-cognitivism tends to bastardize moral discourse. I'm a non-naturalist, and...
A non-naturalist. I mean, right there, you're just like, what the fuck does that mean? I'm a non-naturalist. That's right, I believe in the tooth fairy. Yeah, and Tinkerbell.
Intuitionism can meet the epistemic challenge, I do believe. If you disagree...
Oh, right, intuitionism. I mean, this is just such nonsense and drivel. Let's go with reflexism. Yeah, I have a reflex. And no matter what my reflex is, I should act on it. So if somebody has the reflex of horniness at the sight of a 5-year-old, right, yeah, they should go with that intuition. I mean, God, you're a fucking retard. A retard. You are a retard.
Yeah, I would recommend Michael Humore's book.
I would recommend a cyanide enema. That's what you need. You need some more elements. You know, you're low on heavy metals. So I would suggest a cyanide enema.
Anyway, my complaint comes in the form of a question like the woman asking where all the cowboys went in that horrible song. Where are all the antinatalists defending moral realism? But let us grant the truth of moral realism.
Well, again, who even wants to use a word like morality? Right? I mean, it's just layered and steeped in the religious dogma. So why would a rationalist even go near a word like morality?
As is well known, there are a myriad of competing normative theories. What are we to make of the one that tends to ground negative antinatalism, that is, negative utilitarianism?
Yay, here we go, finally. There we go, that's finally. Now you've said a little bit of jargon that might actually have some kind of solid foundation to build on. So, yes, we have the word utilitarian in there. Yes, they have to throw the word negative on there, but let's just go with that utilitarian thing. Because that's like productive. That's like efficiency. Yeah, so why don't you just give me the efficiency value equation? Do a little Spock logic. Let's hear this crap.
Should moral realists be negative utilitarians? I don't think so. The most pressing reason I believe negative utilitarianism is rejectable is its monochromaticism of vision.
It's monochromatic. That means, oh, it's black and white? Oh my God. You mean it actually sits there and says something like some things are bad and some things are good and we should do the good things and fuck the bad things? Ah, bravo.
In its unqualified form, it leads to a range of absurdities nowhere more clearly brought to light than the famous or infamous pinprick objection.
Let me hear this.
Negative utilitarianism would deem it morally impermissible to bring an entity into existence if it would experience, we'll call it one suffering unit, even if that entity would experience 10,000 pleasure units. But surely this...
Well, look, that's, this is a very minority argument again, okay? Most antinatalists aren't going to sit there and get all hysterical over your little pinpricky crap. That's not what they're talking about. But in substance, the point is a satisfied addiction, which is a satisfied deprivation, is just cleaning up a negative mess in the first place. It has no real value. It has perceptual value in that you're going from negative 18 to negative 4, let's say. So that's forward progress, but you're still in red numbers. So you can't use a red number to compensate for some other red number. Even if it is just a tiny little pinprick, a minus 4 is not going to make a minus 1 a plus 1. It just can't do it because it's still a minus, asshole. So what we're looking for is some sort of actual service beyond the need created by your existence, that you actually serve a need that exists beyond your existence, beyond the satisfaction of your existing needs, the needs that were a consequence of you existing. And there is no such thing. So yes, in a cold universe with no pleasure, there would be no point in even a pinprick. A pinprick would be an act of violence to the peace of that universe. That's the negative utilitarian argument. Your canard that you built it out of is just that, a canard, because you're not recognizing that there's some dubiousness to the real value of this satisfied addiction.
This is absurd. The possible world scenarios or thought experiments that demonstrate the absurdity of negative utilitarianism in its unqualified form are innumerable.
Oh, whatever. Yeah, too bad they're unspeakable, too. Too bad you can't articulate them without obvious challenge to your nonsensical, well, this is the authority, because we said it authoritatively. Yeah, well, saying something authoritatively and demonstrating it rationally and reasonably are two different things.
Often it is complained that a simplified form of negative utilitarianism is being attacked, but simplified is really code for unqualified, and this harkens back to the reason negative utilitarianism is rejectable. It's monochromaticism.
Oh, again, with this monochromatic, I just call you, warty. Your warty and your cancerous ideology. I mean, just this fucking overuse of language, shithead. And to do it twice you make the assertion, the philosophy is monochromatic. Well, that doesn't mean shit, asshole.
Vision, in short. The reduction or prevention of suffering are not our only moral duties. The realm of normativity is far more multifactorial and often...
Multifactorial. I mean, what is that fact? Oh, yeah, you're addicted. Yeah. Well, the anti-nails have accounted for that, shithead. Yeah, there's overt negative suffering and there's desire. What is desire made out of? Okay, that's the question. Is a satisfied desire serving any real need, or is it just satisfying the deprivation, the emptiness created, the negative created by creating a sentient organism, a need machine? Again, you haven't argued that life is serving any purpose, that it's satisfying any need outside of the need it creates.
Ambiguous. Let us turn our attention to Mr. Benatar, the knight in shining armor to anti-natalists everywhere. If you are familiar with his asymmetry argument, forgive the repetition and presenting it here. Benatar contends thusly.
Let's see if he does
that
this right.
1, the presence of pain is bad. 2, the presence of pleasure is good. 3, the absence of pain is good, even if that good is not enjoyed by anyone. And 4, the absence of pleasure is not bad unless there is somebody for whom this absence is a deprivation.
Yeah, those last two could be argued in with the alternative language I personally prefer, that prevention of suffering is a good, prevention of a deprivation is meaningless. Yeah, I mean the satisfaction of a deprivation. So, yeah, prevention of a desire manifesting is neither good nor bad. And preventing suffering is a good. So those are 3 and 4 for me. Those are my recontextualizations of those two.
Benatar asks us to consider 2 scenarios. Scenario A, in which X exists. This involves the presence of pain, which is bad, and the presence of pleasure, which is good. And scenario B, in which X never exists, which involves the absence of pain, which is good, and the absence of pleasure, which is not bad. Benatar argues that because there is nothing bad about not coming into existence, but there is something bad about coming into existence, non-existence is preferable, and as a matter of contingent fact that everyone that exists in the world suffers, or those brought into the world will suffer, it is always morally impermissible to have a child.
It's unethical. Yeah, that's the argument. Again, this moral impermissibility is your rhetoric, your unnecessary perversion and requalification of a simple argument for the purpose of slurring and slandering.
Premise 3 is rejectable. The absence of pain in the absence of an exister is not good. It isn't anything at all. I fail to see how...
Okay, so this is another guy who's basically saying if I come up with a cure for cancer and I prevent millions of people from suffering unnecessarily, it's not good. I mean, it's not a good. Somehow preventing is not a good. Great Text calls this a great argument. Of course he does. Yeah, I mean they don't understand what the word prevention is. They don't understand the concept of prevention. There's nothing to say to that. They're too stupid. Pull out the steamroller.
The property is, in this case, the property of goodness, can be said to inhere in being's negation. Non-existence is intrinsically evaluatively neutral. Now we can say the non-existence of pain in the absence of an exister may be better than the existence of some forms of pain contingent on an exister.
Well, yeah, of course it's contingent on a would-have-been scenario. That's right. So if it would have been, and you stopped it from being, you are now the definition of the outcome. Your act has changed the outcome. And if the one outcome happens, there's a bad. If the other outcome happens, there's a neutral. So there you go. There's the argument. It's not that complicated. Prevention is a good thing. Jesus Christ.
But this is relational. It does not follow that non-existent pain via a non-exister is good.
Yeah, well, obviously it would be via an exister if you didn't prevent the exister. So that's the qualification. The thing would have been. The whole point is that you render it not to be. And in the process of rendering it not to be, you eliminate the harm. Fuck.
Benatar structures his negative utilitarian hedonistic argument where good supervenes on pleasure and bad supervenes on pain, which I find itself is questionable.
I find that sentence incomprehensible. Hedonistic? Benatar is a hedonist? Huh? What?
Such that in considering a possible world in which X might exist, the only thing, the singular factor that we ought to evaluate...
an ought. I thought there was no such thing as an ought, asshole.
Evaluatively take into account is the pain that X would experience as an exister. At minimum, both the negative utilitarianism and the hedonism involved in the argument is questionable.
Well, whatever. You can't mix negative utilitarianism and hedonism. Hedonism is a celebration of the positives, asshole. The non-existent, addiction satisfying bullshit. I mean, like heroin addicts are basically hedonists. They justify imposing harm, doing a bunch of personal destruction to themselves for the glory of the satisfaction of their deprivation addiction mechanism. Their want. Want drives desire. Want is its manifestation of desire. So want is what we're talking about. We're not talking about need. We're not talking about even something of real substance. We're just talking about a perception of need. An organism thinks it needs it. And that's all there is to this pleasure thing.
Negative utilitarianism for reasons already stated, and the hedonistic assertion. Firstly, because pain and pleasure are not always readily demarcatable, and, certainly there are some...
Yeah, that would certainly be the argument that many anti-natalists will make, is that pain has suffering has a quality and substance that is so much more real than this illusionary desire mechanism. There is something called a comfortable state of consciousness, but most of our pleasures are derived not from being superior to merely comfortable. They're merely derived because we're in some negative condition and we wish to get to a neutral condition. And that's where we derive our pleasure from. The sensation of pleasure is the satisfaction of an irritation, not a real good.
Experiments that are pleasurable because they involve pain. Consider some sexual experiences, or the joy that comes from a sense of accomplishment that is self-contingent on pain. If climbing Mount Everest were entirely pleasurable, without bodily hardship, the sense of accomplishment would, I can only imagine, be radically delimited.
Yeah, and what is a sense of accomplishment? Now again, so it's a sense that there's some value. So again, this is talking more about how the suffering is real, and the rest of this crap is a sense of. It's cheese doodles. It's synthetic crap that we think we need. And again, it isn't some kind of, I'm comfortable with myself, I am personally self-actualized, I am complete, I am consciously comfortable, therefore I'm going to get off the couch and go climb a mountain. No, it requires the person to be somehow dissatisfied, discomforted, disquieted, agitated by some sort of, small penis syndrome, that they feel compelled to go climb a fucking mountain, asshole. They're not climbing it because of some, because they've achieved nirvana.
And with it, the experience of joy. It seems clear to me that a person is not de facto rendered worse off experiencing a joy that may be predicated upon mental...
Well, I think if you were fair, you would de facto say that, yeah, it's really stupid to be addicted to things. You could see it in every other cliche addiction, whether it be alcohol or nicotine or heroin or some other mechanism or even sex or some other thing, this compulsion to do it, and to do it in ways that are just so overtly cost ineffective. Just demonstrates the power of the force. And that is the only thing behind your perception of real value for these pleasures, because these pleasures, I will again argue, are more about the fact that you get relieved from your fears, your worries, your distractions. When you're feeling pleasure, it's because you have basically distracted your brain from reality and achieved separation from its usual burdens.
Distress or pain than if she had never experienced the pain or the pleasure. I shall use my own experience of dedication to the enterprise of philosophy as an example.
Oh, you don't have any dedication. You have no integrity. You have no will to be fair to the truth. You're not a philosopher. You're a verbal rapist. You have no passion for the truth.
Philosophy has been one of the great sources of joy in my life.
Because you've perverted it and used it to compensate for your inadequacies. Like this, again, you're playing the actor. This monochromatic image of the actor that provides more contrast and better resolution of detail and intensity. Oh, ironic that the monochromatic image might be able to say more than the distracting, fluffy, colored image.
If not the very source by which all other joys are augmented and refined. At the same time, reading certain philosophic texts has been cause for some of the most intense mental and existentially penetrating anguish I have ever experienced. Has my love of...
Well, whatever anguish you ever experienced from reading something? Curious, strange, bizarre. I mean, usually it takes something a little more emotionally involving, something a little more out of mind for that to happen. Usually it takes a story, not a philosophy, that preys on your emotions, on your attachments, on your ego, on your vulnerabilities, on your fears. Yeah. Because that's what's creating the illusion of satisfaction. That's the deprivation you're feeding. Without the hunger, there's no fucking meal.
Philosophy rendered me worse off than I would have been in its absence? I would contend not. This leads me to the following point.
Yeah, I think your point is going to fail. All right, because there is no redeeming value for your silly satisfactions. The state of your level of comfort has value. What you derive comfort from has no value. That's the illusion. There are no spoons in the matrix. There are no anythings in this matrix. There is, though, the welfare of the sentient, the condition of the sentient, and we know what drives it, and it is hunger. It is not a positive force. It's a negative force.
And this is crucial. When existence is better than non-existence, it is a benefit. When existence is worse than non-existence,
it's just even a ludicrous argument to make. You can't achieve better than non-existence by any rational definition, because the only way that's possible is you would have to contrive a need to exist in the non-existent state that was unsatisfied. All right, by rational, obligatory definition, the non-existence need for nothing. That is perfect. You can't get better than that. You just can't, asshole.
Is a harm. Contemplating antinatalism has been cause, and I would submit to you, dear listener, can be cause for a positive thing. That is the evaluation or reevaluation of the core of your life.
So you can re-delude yourself with some other cliche lie about how you're accomplishing something and that the life has meaning and value intrinsically or something, because God says so. But you're not going to make a rational argument explaining how creating a need that doesn't need to exist is a rational bit of behavior. Because it fundamentally can't be. Need isn't a good thing, idiot.
The question is indeed the question, to be or not to be. Is your existence better than your non-existence? Would it have been better not to have been born?
Well, there's just no point in asking the heroin addict, is the heroin valuable? There's no point in asking, people go through all kinds of abusive relationships and scenarios, and then they end up becoming addicted to that kind of crap and end up becoming abusers themselves. I mean, the psychology of these animals can't be separated. And you've got to acknowledge the psychology in discussing the philosophy. You've got to acknowledge that there's this mechanism of desire, and that desire perverts the scales of value. That people will answer questions because of an ego need, okay? Not necessarily because it's the truth. Humans are intrinsically dishonest, fucker.
Benatar defends a dichotomy between a life worth continuing and a life worth starting. Presumably to stave off the natural response in light of his asymmetry that it, in principle...
Yeah, the natural response. Again, the innate response, the completely human bullshit response, which is, I'm addicted to baseball, baseball should exist, baseball kicks ass. Well, if there's no one on earth who ever heard or conceived of baseball, has no addiction, has no psychology tied into a bunch of players and vicarious ego gratification, then baseball could not exist and everybody be perfectly comfortable with that. Just like wham ball doesn't exist. And cunt flunt. Nobody plays cunt flunt. And nobody's missing it either, asshole. No one's deprived because it doesn't exist, jackass. Because no one's addicted to it. It's that simple.
Or morally mandates universal suicide. This dichotomy is indefensible.
Well, that's another perversion. So this is what you call being a philosopher, is you'll just take a circumstance that has nothing to do with the conversation. The conversation you just acknowledged was about starting a life, and continuing life is irrelevant. The starting is the object. That's where the ball is, boy. You know, follow the ball.
If there are lives worth continuing, there are lives worth starting. If life is worth living...
Again, it's just a stupid argument, okay? The existent have the investment of their whole psychology into the game. If you don't create the addiction, then you don't have to create the thing to feed the addiction. But the fact is once you have the addictive organism, it requires a perceived, an innately perceived negative to discontinue that relationship, that parasitic relationship between the addictor and the addictee, however you want to describe it. But yeah, once the relationship is created, you have to do harm to undo the relationship, at least harm to will, the desire of the individual. I think Benatar would explicitly say that if people non-existed with the snap of a finger, that the equation is again balanced between initiating a life and whether or not discontinuing a life. But obviously a continued life, there's this problem of how you do or how you accomplish the cessation, the ending of the existence without there being a realization of ending, which will be a disappointment to the person ending. But if you end in a millisecond without knowing it was ever going to happen, all of that math falls back into place because now you can't be harmed. You can't be harmed by the event because there will be no understanding or contemplation of your lost will. The fact that, oh, I never got to climb Mount Everest. You'll never have that conscious moment of disappointment.
It wasn't wrong that it came into being. Suicide is rational where life is not worth living. It escapes me how Benatar can claim that coming into existence is always a harm, but that continuing in one's existence is not a harm. If in
Again, I don't think that's exactly what he's saying. He's just making a concession to the point that once you are here, you are invested in the here-ness. You are now a player. You are now generating need, desire. You're a needy person once you're here. And that changes the equation. Again, the equation is about this, what needs to exist, and what price needs to be paid. And neither thing. You don't need to purchase, so of course there's no purchase price that needs to be paid.
Possible non-existence is preferable to existence prior to coming into existence. How is non-existence in principle not preferable to existence once existent? As in life, I'm going to end this commentary.
Well, again, all you have to do to understand, okay, is to eliminate from the perception any negative appreciation of the end game. So if the end game is instantaneous and there's no perception of failure or disappointment or unsatisfied need, then the equation rebalances.
Death. Amazingly, Benatar claims that death constitutes a harm for existers, and in discussions with antinatalists time and time again, they lump suffering and death together.
Well, it's idiotic not to lump death with pain, because obviously most deaths involve pain, suffering, general unpleasantness. Months of it and hundreds of thousands of dollars of incurred losses.
Not the process of dying, death itself. In short,
No one's arguing that from the antinatalist position. Death itself is meaningless. It's all that matters are the experiences endured by sentient creatures. That's what most antinatalists are arguing. The only value in this equation is the value of the conscious experiences. Notions like how long you live is irrelevant. All this other stuff doesn't mean anything. That's all subjective babble. That's style points. Has absolutely nothing to do with how fast you went and whether you crossed the finish line. If we lived 22 days, it wouldn't matter because there'd still always be, there'd be 7 billion people. So what? Consciousness would be maintained. I mean, it's not part of the argument. And so you injecting it into the argument, again, is just you playing a game.
Summarize it this way. Death can only be a harm if life is a benefit. If life is a harm, then how is it that death is not a benefit? Well, I hope you've enjoyed the video.
Well, like I said, it theoretically would be. The point is pragmatically, you can't argue that to somebody who's currently addicted. So, if I was Benatar, I would have wrote the book differently. All right? But I don't think Benatar was saying what you're implying he was saying. He wasn't saying that living is better than not living.
And perhaps at least found it somewhat informative to you antinatalists out there. We breeders are not necessarily calloused or blind to suffering.
Well, of course you are. Like I said, you're callous and blind to your obligation to be certain of what you're doing and not to be imposing. So you're going to say you're going to deal with the word impose in your next video. You called it a buzzword. See, that's exactly, you're saying you're not insensitive, and yet you just called the word impose a buzzword. In my opinion, that pretty much is an indication that you intend to be insensitive to the harm you create on people who didn't concede to your harm. That you said, I know what's best, okay? You will sacrifice for the rest of us to ride our roller coaster. That's all you're saying. Okay, you're committing an act of imposition based on an arrogant presumption that somehow you know what's best. And I don't think you do. I don't think you're qualified. I don't think you can qualify yourself to play that kind of a god. Asshole.
Quote from an essay, the name of which, along with the author, I cannot remember, what to paraphrase. There may be better ways of caring for people than preventing their existence.
Well, whatever that means.
Well, I've been away for some time.
So it's very pompous and arrogant, isn't it?
Seems as if
the most sure way to care is not to impose a negative. Not to impose risk, even. Not to impose. I mean, that's a pretty sure thing. As long as you understand that what you're imposing isn't something like $1 million or something. Something that has an intrinsic likelihood of producing a positive effect. So anyway, with no downside, very little downside risk. I mean, there is some downside risk to giving somebody $1 million, I suppose. But it's a minimum downside risk, and the downside risk is essentially created by their own stupidity. So, by some rational definition, it might be, you could say there's no downside risk if you're not a complete asshole. Alright. Anyway, enough of a video. But yeah, you're a disgrace to intellectual integrity, you know, things like that. You have this pretense of somebody gives a fuck about serious logic and thoughtful consideration of philosophical concepts. You have the vocabulary, but you rape it. That's all. You're a molester of vocabulary and verbiage and meaning. That's the key one. And I hope you get run over by a steamroller. Fuck you. You're a cunt. The end.